we've got you're a deist. Is that the correct way to pronounce that?
Yeah, good enough.
Okay. Just for TikTok purposes, how old are you?
35.
Okay, awesome. All right. So what you want to talk about there, man?
So I was listening to the last conversation, a little bit of the one before that. I feel like I understand why you say God supports child marriage, chattel slavery, sexual slavery, child sacrifices, because these things did happen in the Bible and they were, condoned by God. But I feel like it's weird to characterize God as supporting those things overall. I feel like it's a little bit like walking into a surgery and seeing a surgeon with a scalpel opening someone up and being like, look, God supports tearing into people with a knife. Look at what he's done. Because really, in broad strokes, the story.
I have no idea how that relates. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I don't know how.
Let me explain it.
Okay.
I was right about to. So, I mean, the whole narrative of the Bible and Christ coming and the idea of heaven and his return after the Great Tribulation and setting everything right, sticking Satan in the abyss, that's the end. That's the goal, to eliminate suffering and change all the evil and suffering in the world. God is performing surgery on a fallen mankind. And it feels like when people want to just focus on these things, you're looking at the surgeon mid-surgery and you're so focused on, look, the surgeon's cutting this guy open, and that's all you're seeing, rather than the end goal of, yeah, we're doing this to fix the situation.
Well, to work within your analogy here, it's not like the surgeon has opened up like his patient and is about to start working. It's more or less like, oh, we're doing an appendectomy, but then he stabs him in the eye, and it's like, don't worry, there's a process to this, after stabbing his patient in the eye. Like that's more akin, I guess, to what we're talking about here, because like what the analogy that you used is just a false analogy.
Well, I want to push back on that. You're saying it's an appendectomy. I'm saying there's trying to save a patient critical on the table that's going to die shortly unless extreme corrective measures are taken.
Right. That would be an appendectomy. Like when your appendix
if you're
bursts.
infected and you're about to die, but that's not typically what you'd look at as, a huge emergency. That's on the more minor side of things.
No, I mean, if your appendix bursts, it is definitely something that's like, that's something that needs to be corrected immediately.
No, okay.
Like that's not something you can walk off.
Fair enough. But my analogy, let's pretend there was a car accident and the patient was just in a mess and he's getting fixed up all over. Anyways,
okay. I feel like this is a bit pedantic because, like, regardless of what surgery is happening, sure, let's say that they're trying to save this person's life, and let's say he takes a sledgehammer and breaks his leg, or any kind of thing that's not going to help the patient. That's more akin to what I'm saying here with these things up above. Like, you even affirmed when he first came on that God does support those things, but it's like, you're like, yeah, he supports those things, but the end goal is something different.
But it is.
And I mean, is God all powerful?
Yes.
Okay, then it seems like he's allowing all this shit to happen in the first place, and for some reason he's not doing anything about it. So it kind of seems like this is what
that's literally why he sent Jesus. That's like a weird thing to say.
All right, where did Jesus stop any of those four things up there?
I'm telling you, that's the end goal. That's the whole point of what's written in the New Testament and the Gospel. Okay. Is that all these things are coming to an end. That's like the whole point of the Bible. It hasn't happened yet. So
let me get this straight. Let me get this straight. If you have a leader, right? Let's say a president that says, okay, the ultimate end goal is for society to be a utopia, but also I'm going to tell you to go over there into this other city and unalive every single person in there, with the exception of the young virgin girls that I am going to force into marriages to you. And then 1 out of every 500 of those young virgin girls is going to be sacrificed on an altar for me. Even though his end goal is a utopia, does does his end goal mean that his command of wiping out entire groups of people and taking sexual slaves and performing child sacrifices and forcing child marriage, does that mean that all of that's okay?
How did he force any child marriage?
Well, at the time in the Old Testament, children were it was just a normal thing for children to be married. And so like when we talk about Jacob, the one that gets renamed to Israel later, he bought his two wives, but those two wives would have been children. They would have been in their teens. And there's several indications, or several instances throughout the Old Testament where women are married, and women are generally married like right after they start puberty. And that's just a general practice at this particular time frame. So like God supporting child marriage is just pretty much any marriage that is happening in the Old Testament, and sometimes even in the New Testament, where any of that is occurring. So, I mean, like,
no, that's fine. I just took issue with the word forced because I was wondering how would God force someone to do that?
Okay, Numbers 31 would be a forced version of that, because in Numbers 31, God commands Moses to go in and kill, unalive all of the Midianites, including the small boys.
No, that's fine. I'm asking how he forced them, though.
Right, I was getting there.
Okay,
unalived all of them and keep all of the young virgin girls for yourselves as spoils of war, who were then to be forced into marriages, to the Israelite people.
Right, and so, how did God force them? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Can I ask a clarifying question? You're asking me how it can be considered force, or where the forcing occurs when the Israelite army went in, unalived everybody in that community with the exception of these virgin girls. And then these virgin girls were placed into like the Israelite society where they were then married.
No, I understand as children. What you're saying as recorded has happened, but I'm saying like from an atheist, how does a God that doesn't exist force anyone to do anything?
Oh, no, I'm doing an internal critique. This is an internal critique of Christianity. I'm looking at what the story says. In the story, it says this thing, and in this story, there is forced child marriage.
Okay, but at the end of the day, the people are what made the decisions.
Well, but the story says God made the decision.
Right, he relayed the decision, but then, I mean, were the people then automatons or like...
Well, I mean, they were definitely expected to obey God, right?
Okay, so yes, so they received a command and they followed through. I'm just like, it's just weird that you're saying like God forced them as if they had no choice.
No, I'm not saying God forced them. I'm saying that God supported the forced child marriages of these young virgin girls. So like, that's what I'm saying here. I feel like a lot is getting lost in like some pedantic word stuff right now.
Sure. Okay, so let's skip over that. So let's rewind a little bit back to the original point. So I'm not trying to take away from the fact that a lot of awful things, happened in the Bible, or even that a lot of awful things were directed by God at that time and place. That's not my argument. So if there's anything you want to talk about that, we can, or we can just put that to bed because I'm not disputing that.
Okay. Well, I mean, do you consider God to be omnibenevolent?
What do you mean by that? You've used that term a few times. I don't understand what you quite mean by that.
Well, omnibenevolent is just defined as being like all good. So like every action that you do is considered good. I'll get you like a formal definition for that.
That's good. Let's work off a formal definition. Then I can give you a yes or no.
Okay. So omnibenevolent, normally given of a deity possessing perfect or unlimited goodness. So like God can't do evil, essentially, is what it is. Everything that God does or commands is considered good by nature.
I'd say that God's ethical structure is utilitarian. And by that definition, I'd say ultimately, yes, that does describe God in a utilitarian frame of ethics. Yeah.
Okay. Considering our conversation about Numbers 31, where God, has the forcing of child marriages, which is a form of sexual slavery, and then later on commanding for child sacrifices, would you consider all those things good actions?
I would consider that God beginning of the process of turning people around in a fallen world, that these things were going on with them
Right.
and apart from them anyway. I would consider that. No, well, let me finish. I would consider that beginning to steer the boat away from these things, and through the arc of the entire Bible, through Jesus, through the return of Christ, having a solution where all of these things are done away with, all suffering is gone. I would consider from a long-term perspective, from a utilitarian ethics framework, that yes, it was the beginning of a long turning of a rudder of a ship to get things in the right direction.
Well, how does committing a genocide, how is that setting us on that path? Like, I guess I just don't understand why you would say that this is like somehow forcing a small virgin girl into a marriage is somehow doing anything to prevent child marriages. Like, that, none of that makes sense to me. Can you maybe explain like how that works to prevent like child sex trafficking?
A lot of it doesn't make sense to me, and I don't think you could have anyone go through the Old Testament and read the examples of these things and just say, oh yeah, I know the cause and effect of this, and what this will do to people's psychology, and when these minor changes are brought in, how that'll change the course of this and that thing. And I don't know.
But I mean, don't you see that? I'm sorry to harp on this, but that is a really big red flag for me. That you're sitting there saying, oh yeah, sure, God forced these small virgin girls into forced marriages, but that was all to make sure that it didn't happen at some point in the future that we're still waiting on. Like, I don't understand how that factors into it, and why you would find that convincing at all.
Let me revisit this. So God is starting to intervene in a culture in which all of these things are going on. It's not like he's saying everyone's, 21st century sensibilities, and he's just saying, okay, guys, now we're going to introduce all of these things into you guys. We're going to have child marriage. We're going to have, all these things, genocide, whatever. All of these things were going on and were the norm. He's inserting himself into a culture that's like this already, and all of the neighbors are like this already. He's beginning to set up the framework in starting to turn the ship around. Just like, if you have okay, go ahead.
Hold on. I guess I'm still not understanding how prescribing child marriages, sexual slavery, and child sacrifices is doing anything whatsoever to turn the ship around. Like that's what's called a non sequitur. That means that your conclusion doesn't follow from your premises. So like your premises are that God had the Israelites marry children so that he could right this ship and make it so that children were no longer to be married.
And like I said, I don't understand the nuance and how all these little things come together. I don't. I admitted that plainly. And if that's all I had to go on were these examples in Genesis and Exodus, in Deuteronomy, I probably wouldn't be a Christian. But I have Christ and the example of Christ, and he was familiar with these stories. He knew what was going on, but he had the same message that he built off of this tradition. And so I guess I would say, built off of my faith on Christ, I can look at these things and say, I don't really understand all of this. Like, obviously, these things taken on an individual level are evil things. But I know that, Christ claiming the Father and claiming what future is laid out for mankind and his promises in heaven and in the new world, that's the trajectory we're on. I don't know why God chose it to do it the way he did. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, just like it doesn't to you. But that's the big picture that I see as having faith as a Christian.
Right. Well, Aridaeus, you understand that you're giving a lot of vibes that are like, I was just following orders. Like, I'm just following orders.
I didn't follow orders to do anything. What are you talking about?
Well, no. So like if
I did these things. What do you mean?
No. I'm not saying that you did these things, but what I'm saying is that in the New Testament, you don't have any instance where Jesus does away with any of those things.
How could he? He was an itinerant preacher. How could he change the world? That wasn't even what he was here for. He says, "I'm no."
Well, no. I mean, like in the Christian and Jewish religion, At no point in the New Testament does Jesus say anything that says, hey, don't marry children, don't force women into sexual slavery, don't sacrifice children to God, don't hold slaves. Like God, Jesus in the New Testament does not issue any kind of new commandments about any of those things.
No, he says, love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah, and there are some priests that love their neighbors too much.
Okay, do you think they got it right?
By
your example?
By my example of priests raping children?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they got it wrong. Can we agree?
I mean, I think the act is wrong, but I'm not sure where in the Bible it says that that's wrong. No, I'm saying that in the Bible, I don't see where Jesus says that it's wrong to do that.
He doesn't go over everything that's wrong. That's the whole idea of a message of loving your neighbor, and every single example that's given.
Right, but Jesus doesn't. But Jesus doesn't issue any kind of commandment that. Well, he doesn't need to. I think
a commandment for every possible evil that a human could conceive of.
Erudus, what does he say about the laws of Moses?
He says, not a single will pass away until everything's fulfilled. And when he died, everything was fulfilled that was spoken.
No, it's not everything. No, everything has been fulfilled because he hasn't come the second time.
Of the law, and then the law's done away with.
No, but the law's not done away with because Jesus had. Right. Well, Jesus hasn't come a second time, and so that's
not part of what he was talking about, and that's a theological.
How can everything be fulfilled if Jesus hasn't actually fulfilled everything? Because part of the problem.
Sorry, go ahead. I'll let you finish, then I'll go.
Right. Well, part of the prophecy and everything about Jesus is that, he's sacrificed himself to provide, salvation to people, but his job isn't complete until he comes again, right? Like the second coming of Christ is still a thing that is still to come, correct?
Yeah. But what he was talking about as far as the law not being done away with, all you have to do is read Paul to know the law's done away with. And what Jesus was speaking about as fulfilling the things that he was talking about in that verse were fulfilled with him dying on the cross. That was the conclusion of the law. And Paul makes that very clear.
Well, where is that at?
Okay, let me find it for you. Give me 1 sec.
Okay.
Are you telling me just generally that you're not familiar with the scriptures with Paul talking about that Jesus fulfilled the law, or I don't want to know I'm getting the right thing for you?
Well, right. I mean, I'm just wondering which verse you consider to say that Jesus fulfilled the law and the law of Moses no longer applies.
Sure. 1 second. Looks like Romans 7.
7:6, Galatians 3:25.
I think those are them. Yeah.
Let's see. Galatians 3:25 says, "Now that this faith has come, we are no longer under a guardian." Romans 7:6 says, Romans 7:6 states that, hold on, sorry, let me get the actual verse here. But now, by dying to what once bound us, we have been released from the law so that we serve in the new way of the Spirit and not in the old way of the written code.
Right. So by Jesus dying, the law, that what he said, not a word of this will pass away, Jesus fulfilled that. And the old covenant was done. We're under a new covenant that's primarily focused on love. So,
okay,
go ahead.
Sorry. This sounds more like he's talking about, because in this, you have to understand the context of what Paul is talking about for Romans 7:6. And in Romans, Paul is talking about this salvation that Jesus provides. In the previous law, the law of Moses, you had to perform certain things in order to attain salvation. Like there's the Yom Kippur ritual, there's all these sacrifices and everything, and all of these different rituals that have to be done in order to attain this salvation. What Paul is saying here is that by dying, that ceremonial part of the law is no longer binding. So Christians now don't have to sacrifice 30 goats a year in order to attain salvation and for their sins to be carried off into the wilderness. That's what he's saying here. He's not actually saying that, none of the law of Moses applies anymore. That's not what he's saying here. I would say that the moral laws that are prescribed by the laws of Moses have not went away. And I also started this by asking where Jesus says this. This would be an opinion of Paul, not something that Jesus supposedly said in the Bible.
Well, as a Christian, I take to Paul to clarify what Jesus says, and you can, disagree with that stance, and that's fine, but we would just differ there.
Okay, well, still, I feel like my explanation of this being more about what is required to attain salvation rather than, the moral law code in the Old Testament. I feel like that's what it's talking about.
Well, I think scholars would tell you today that this separation of moral laws and like ceremonial laws, these things are modern inventions. They didn't exist during the time of Christ and prior to that. So I think.
Well, so I do agree with you that that's a more modern interpretation of like separating them out into these different. It was all the law, but what I guess I was just using that kind of language in order to indicate like what section of the law that Paul was referring to there. In the section of the law, this monolithic law code is about how to attain salvation and how to get to heaven and how to appease God. And it was, I would say that Jesus, I could probably pull up the Bible verse if my memory's not fucking with me right now, where Jesus talks about how the moral law code of Moses is integral to, being considered, like, is integral to the judgment that is laid upon you by God. Adhering to the laws of Moses, at least not the ceremonial laws or the laws that are directly related to salvation, but rather than rather the moral laws about how you should act as a person towards your fellow Israelite, your fellow Hebrew, or your fellow Christian.
I'm with you. I see where you're going. And I want to just say, I want to try to get this done in the next 4 minutes. I got to run. And I do appreciate the conversation. But just to wrap up, I see where you're going. I feel like that in itself could be a very long discussion, like the very particulars of what's meant there.
Yeah.
So I'll just, conclude my final point by reiterating, I don't understand, just like you do, I see and am repulsed by a lot of the things in the Old Testament. I don't understand why they're there or why they had to happen or anything like that. The reason I can tolerate it, and like I said, look in broad strokes to this idea of a whole, redemptive picture as a story arc to the Bible through Revelation and Christ's return, is because of the character of Jesus, how he came and represented himself, how he preached, and his promises for the future. And that's where I stand. So,
but before you leave out, I just want to, can I ask you a hypothetical?
Yep.
Okay. Hypothetically, if you were to receive some kind of vision or message from God that says that you need to go to another town and unalive everybody in that town, or another country and unalive everybody in the country, commit a genocide, would you follow that command from God?
Well, I think I was schizophrenic. But let's say I was in a town of 500 people and we all went outside and God was talking to all of us and they have camcorder footage of it or whatever, and there was some burden of proof that could be shown to me that it was actually God telling me to do this, then yeah, I would. But I would assume I was schizophrenic. And would you, if God was actually appearing in the sky? Past any point of doubt that you could muster that he was telling you to do these things?
I do not mean this disrespectfully, but fuck no, I would not.
If it was actually God, if it was actually God,
if it was actually right, if it was actually God and he actually told me to go and unalive an entire group of people, I would throw a middle finger in the air and tell him that he can fuck off. That's
because I think fundamentally you think that God is bad and that any results from that would have evil ends.
No. I
think the opposite of that. So I wouldn't want to do it, but I would have faith that it was for a good end. Right. If I was absolutely sure it was God, like I said, I would assume I was schizophrenic. But if the burden of proof were met, that it were actually God, like God, capital G, God telling me to, and I believe God is, in the end of the day, good, then yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
Well, no. So just to reiterate here, I'm not actually, I'm not prescribing any kind of thing about God in this or my preconceived notion of God. I'm merely responding directly to the command or the message that is going and committing a genocide. So That's what I'm talking about. Like I'm just regardless of whether it's Yahweh or any other God, it could be Zeus that's telling me to do it. Like it doesn't really matter. Whoever's telling me to do that, I'm going to tell them to fuck off because I'm not going to do that.
3 quick points on that. One, there's a question of if God is essentially good or not. If God is good, if we're going to grant that God is good, right? And we're going to grant that God is much wiser than us on a whole different plane of existence. He could foresee consequences to the results of any choice, any action, right? So if God has this knowledge, he is good, and he gives you a command, the results of that command, whether or not it's immediate or not, are going to have good results in the end. And trying to say like, oh, I know better is placing your wisdom and goodness over God's. So if you want to say God is not good, or if God is not wise, then by all means say, fuck off, I'm not doing that.
I don't feel
God is good. And if you grant that God is wiser than us, then you are serving good by doing those things. And so
I don't think that it takes a genius or anything like that in order to understand that unaliving an entire group of people is not a good thing. Like whatever your end goal is or whatever you're hoping to accomplish by it can be accomplished in different ways and without needing to unalive people.
What if it were
on that kind of scale?
What if it were the top 500 most influential Nazis in 1935? What if you had that knowledge and you wiped out the whole movement with those 500 people because you knew who they were? And they were gone. World War II doesn't start. Millions of lives are saved.
So like
genocide.
There's a bunch. Well, for one thing, that wouldn't be a genocide, but
Sure,
also
you're killing 500 people. You have no reason to. They're all German.
No. So what would be comparable here is like if I went back to 1935 and I convinced the Americans or the Allies to just unalive everybody in Germany.
What
like
if you
that,
did? What if you killed 20,000 people in an entire city, but it saved 50 million lives down the road? And just
I would totally reject that. I would not, because that is the sentiment of Israel right now, in their genocide. So like that is wholly wrong in every conceivable way. Like that's just not good.
So is any civilian I'm not taking sides Israel Palestine. I don't have settled thoughts on that. I don't know a lot about it. I know it's pretty messed up. But in any war where there's civilian casualties, is a civilian casualty ever justified? Was it in World War II to stop Nazis?
No, I don't think civilian casualties are at all justified
Ever
in this respect.
In any circumstance. Because you're going against any realistic war scenario. That's naive. I feel like
you would be fine unaliving a baby if it meant that you could unalive a Nazi.
If I could unalive one baby to save 10 more babies, we're talking about utilitarian ethics here.
Okay. Well, so if I told you, hey, unalive this baby now, or these 10 babies are going to get unalived, you would unalive the baby.
Maybe not for 10, but what if it was 1,000 and it was a for sure thing?
What if it was 1 million? What if it was 25 million?
Yes.
3 billion babies.
Yes. No, these are moral quandaries, but it's like it's
not a moral quandary for me. Like if I don't unalive this baby, I'm not the one that's unaliving however other many babies. That's going to be like, whoever is making that decision, that's their decision. So like, no, this entire thing, like it's just a pretty big red flag for me.
Right. But like the reality is that these are ethical choices made in every war and every conflict throughout history. And especially in the wars. And if you would have taken that stance, you would have lost. And the Nazis.
Well, no, if I was in a war room, where they were like, yes, we can take out this top leader of whatever terrorist organization, but we're gonna unintentionally unalive a whole school full of children. I would totally reject whatever kind of plan is gonna end up unaliving an entire school of children. Like that's not a quandary. That's not a thing that I really need to debate with myself. Like that's a hard no. Like nope, never. That's never gonna make that decision.
At the time and place that you're making it as a human, yes. If you're going and looking back at things historically, and you can deduce that if we dropped this bomb at this place, it would have saved 40 million lives. And then you can go back and make the choice. Because if God has the foresight, he can see that choice. So are you going to doom 40 million people, including children, to death? Or are you going to...
I think in order...
choice.
Well, if I were to be God and I had perfect knowledge about things, and I'm all knowing, I think that I would know a way to accomplish my goal without the need for unaliving anybody, any children or any collateral damage. Like I feel like I would have the knowledge to be able to do that perfectly, in that particular situation.
If you actually intervened yourself rather than, having people intervene. No, I see what you're saying. I was keeping our conversation towards what you would do in a utilitarian situation in a war if you could look back. And it's just weird to see you justify throwing 15 million people to the meat grinder when you could have chosen to kill 100, even if they were children. Like, that's an immoral choice in my view.
I think that it's in.
But dude, I gotta run. I really appreciate the talk. Unless there's something you want to touch on for the last minute, I'll answer a question if you got one.
No, you're fine. This could continue going on for a while. So I appreciate you.
Take care.